second breakfast. We are here today with two very special guests, Pete and Matt, longtime defense tech acquisitions aficionados who are starting a new thing, TBD. We had this past Friday afternoon, too late for our second breakfast recording, a potentially landmark turning point question mark speech from your Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth. Where should we start on this? Maybe before we get into this speech, set the context for kind of where I don't know where the discussion and debate is today around
Yeah,
acquisition.
why is acquisition broken? Are we chasing ghosts or are we chasing a crisis?
Uh, Acquisition has been in a perpetual state of reform for decades. Every past administration has tried, and there's been some progress made over the last few years. But fundamentally, we're still not delivering major capabilities to the operational commands at the speed and scale they require. There's still long delays, huge billion-dollar cost overruns, many canceled programs, and in a dynamic operational environment that we're facing, particularly in the Indo-Pacific, Indo-PACOM and others just don't have the capabilities that they need at the scale to deter our adversaries. So refocusing on the acquisition system, the massive bureaucracy, the full industrial base, traditional and non, to say, we have to do better. We have to radically change how we're doing for shipbuilding, munitions, everywhere else. And then overall, the culture of both the department and industry uh, needs to change. We're fundamentally not delivering. You look at the single digit ships that the Navy is delivering. We're still far behind on munitions. We're still not integrating capabilities that they need to for a full kill chain, and not fully leveraging software for that rapid iterative capability advancement. Um, there's many more things we could unpack, but those are the big challenges. Matt, anything else I missed?
Well, there's been a lot of push in Congress for some really good reforms to encourage non-traditional vendors also into the market. I think, one of the things we've seen is just an incredible influx. 10 years ago, you would never get a defense acquisition professional to talk about private capital. It'd be like, why would we talk about private capital? That's nowhere near defense. But now it is a real thing, and it's, billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars coming in to build defense technologies. So I think while there's a lot of authorities that have been given, a lot of reforms, like Pete said, over the years, I think there is a renewed focus on, or one of the things that really does need help. You asked if the system is broken. Is we just really still have not taken advantage of that private capital. Still have not really taken advantage of those commercial products. It's a lot of it's on the fringe. It's small prototypes and things like that, but we really haven't gotten those to scale and really shown how we can kind of take advantage of those new technologies that, while they're great as they are, today, because the technology has come so far, but they're also going to get just incredibly better over a very near term time scale, given the investments and the focus and all the talent that's going after it. So yeah, that's one of the areas that I think is worth focusing on in terms of what needs to be fixed and how to keep that pipeline going.
As an emergent principle, where are the primes failing? Uh, Lockheed has Lockheed Ventures. Raytheon RTX has RTX Ventures. They are putting money into promising startups. They are aligning patient capital in the defense industrial base in innovative ways. Uh, is there some sort of an uncleaned up mess around the six primes that dominate American defense expenditure?
Yeah, no, you're right. There are some of the primes, and we give them props. They are making some investments. They've stood up sort of a venture capital arm, and so I would argue it's pretty small dollars overall. But they are kind of hedging, I think, some of their bets in terms of promising companies that maybe they would buy, acquire in the future, or potentially partner with. And they have done some partnering with different what we would call non-traditional companies. But fundamentally, the primes, where they fall short is Well, for one, they have modeled over the years, I would argue from the Cold War, they modeled the government processes very, very well to the point where they have so much overhead and so much sort of legacy processes that are just very, very hard to shift away from. And while the government has gotten leaner in some ways, a lot of the primes have still stayed very, very top heavy and very process driven. So it's hard for them to go fast, and I think we've seen that with every time there's a report of a delay right on a program. It's one of the primes that's like 30% behind and things like that. So they have to shift. They have to pivot to this new paradigm, and so far they have not really, I don't think, demonstrated their ability to really take advantage of commercial technology, privately developed commercial technology, and bring it into systems that they own, that they essentially have control over. So I think this is why we need that non-traditional defense base to bring that novel innovation. Sometimes it's lower cost, sometimes it comes with different con-ops that have to be adopted, and it takes private capital sometimes to push the department in that way. And the primes are just not investing enough private capital, not doing enough IRAD to really make that shift. So that's kind of what I'm saying.
Yeah, and let me add to Matt's point. Well, one, to give the props that for all the major weapon systems that we have in inventory today that have some game-changing technology, the primes have developed most of that over the last few decades. But the fundamental business model is broken or needs to change. Right now the primes spend a small percentage on R&D, and most of that's reimbursed by the department. And then, the main focus is winning, that winner take all development contract. You get that big contract, you crowd out, the competitors, they make it out of that segment for the next decade. And then you're on a cost plus contract, which the criticism is always you're incentivized to take longer because that's more revenue, more income for the primes. And then you get the follow on production contract, which is, much larger scale. And then you operate and sustain that system for the next 30 plus years. So that business model, that revenue stream is fundamentally different from a non-traditional that will spend their own private capital to prototype and develop a capability and then look to sell a more mature solution to the department. So that's part of the challenge that we need to pivot the industry on.
I guess that's a good question. I mean, like the idea that it's a more mature solution that they're selling is that fundamentally true? Is that always true? I mean, like I think of Palantir. Like Palantir was a decade plus build up. It was very, very small. It was an experiment in SOCOM for the most part that then grew into a mature-ish platform that is still in the maturity stage. But that maturation occurs not only with the technology, but it also has to occur within the tactics and procedures that units are using and developing to be able to implement those capabilities, right? So, like, is there not a bifurcation there? Are we actually saying that commercial technology is coming in whole cloth, ready to just be implanted, and that's what we're fixing?
It's going to vary widely by capability area. Most aren't just right out of the box, ready to go. That there is some maturation, and if you're developing more, as non-traditionals develop more defense solutions, there is that maturation, but they're at least going to have, an 80% solution. They're going to have mature prototypes that you can have fly-offs, shoot-offs. You can work with operators in the test community to say, is there a there? The old model in acquisition is, hey, you write thousands of pages of proposals and lock, government officials up in a room for a year or more to do a source selection based on a paper proposal and pipe dreams that you're years ahead of even starting development. So the pivot is more, show us what you have, take it out to an exercise, take it out to a test range. It may not be a full up solution that you could deploy to soldiers tomorrow, but it's going to be much more mature. And there's always going to be that rapid iteration with the operational community that's going to be vital to get this, focused on impact.
One reform that maybe hits at your point, Justin, that you're kind of getting at there is, one of the things we've done in the past is we've kind of spent like a year and a half on analysis of alternative processes where like literally there'll be like a study team that goes out and talks to all the operators, and they come back and they have this huge set of requirements that they feel they need to get after to complete a mission, and they're all valid things. But essentially, what oftentimes comes out of the AOA, because it doesn't always have the informed cost, like the cost of these things, or the time that it would take to develop them and field them, or the scaling that would go with, like, to get the production at the level you'd want. So oftentimes they just result in more exquisite requirements, which is what I think the primes have been optimized to respond to. And I think what we're seeing with the non-traditionals is, and one of the reform areas is actually shifting from that whole long process to actually just competitive prototyping, which is definitely more where the non-traditionals are, because they're kind of a Silicon Valley mindset. They want to bring a product. They want to have a product in mind before they even start talking to the government, and they want to have some type of initial kind of prototype for that. So I think that's maybe one of the differences we're seeing, and some of the reforms get after.
So just to put a collective theme around this, something that I'm gathering from your commentary is that the defense primes have effectively de-risked from aggressive research and development, that they have narrow R&D budgets internally, but most of the truly breathtaking development is taking place elsewhere. So that's the posit here. From a stockholder's perspective, if you hold common stock in Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, something like that, that's intelligent business design. And if you do see up-and-coming technology that is extraordinarily valuable, then you've got an M&A tool that you can go out and you can acquire it. So there's a corporate governance and capital markets sheen to all of this, that we are regretting the fact that the primes aren't doing R&D, but are we saying that the R&D isn't happening? Is there actually a lack of private capital that's going to startups to inculcate these new ideas? Because otherwise, if the net impact on the American industrial base is that the same sort of technological development is happening, it's just shifted elsewhere rather than the primes, is there even a problem?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're getting at is that there's no R&D. I think there is R&D. So we're not saying that the primes are not being innovative. There is innovation going on. It's government funded innovation towards products that are much more exquisite, much more limited, and things that we are just, I think Admiral Paparo, I think there's been a bunch of combatant commanders who have said, yes, we love a lot of these products. We love these missiles that are $5 million, $10 million a pop, but that's not going to solve the Indo-PACOM fight. And so that's where I think what we're saying here is that there does need to be new thinking, and then some of the non-traditionals are bringing that new thinking, like companies like Anduril, Palantir, Castilian, and Hermes, and all these companies that are basically leaping ahead towards the Indo-PACOM problem set, which involves scalability, involves quick iterations. It just involves more rapid sort of timelines. And that's where I just think, not to say that the primes aren't being innovative, but they're being innovative on a much different time scale, being innovative on much more on a government directed kind of basis, and not necessarily coming up with those concepts that are going to solve the kind of Indo-PACOM challenges. So I think it's a complementary thing too, though. You do need both. So we're not saying that they're not doing no innovation or they should go away. We're just saying you do need both of them, and I think a lot of the reforms are trying to bring in that hedge force that gets after those things that have been lacking in the last 10 years.
Do you think being venture backed enables greater risk taking at the R&D level? Can you move faster rather than a company with a public float like Raytheon?
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
And why is that?
Sorry, go ahead.
Is it just like you're not under quarterly pressure from stockholders, that there's no annual meeting, your board chair doesn't have to go on CNBC and be grilled? That are you insulated from traditional forms of corporate accountability, and that enables you to make errors faster?
They're just on a different pressure and different mindset. I mean, their ethos is that speed to, that product market fit. The venture-backed community usually wants, quicker returns and higher returns. So there's that pressure to, we'll give you some runway, but you've got to kind of sort this out quickly and iterate and secure that contract which often runs counter to some of the long department timelines. But it's really to say, hey, we have an elite team with sufficient capital to go mature some capabilities, pull in some partners where appropriate, and go, work closely with operators to iterate and really solve some of their meaty challenges. Um, so it's a different mindset and paradigm from what the traditional primes with the long established um, corporate structures have. But I think they're just radically more incentivized to iterate.
Yeah, I think just to put a final point on that is the business model for the primes is cash flow, and that's totally respectable. They've built pretty stable stock around that, and so the investors, the stock market basically wants to see highly positive cash flow. They want to see growth, and so they're very focused on maintaining that. I think that is and stock buybacks, right? So they spend 2 to 3 times more in stock buybacks than they do in IRAD. So that basically just means that there's less R&D investment internally and more of those other things that the stock market expects from them. Whereas, the startups really are putting all their cash back in the business because they have to build those product lines, they have to get that growth um, so that they can become profitable at a certain point in time. And so they definitely are taking a much different risk calculus, and it's not about cash flow. It's about product development. So yeah, I think that's the big difference.
With that as background, the problem set clearly identified. What was in this big speech last week?
Yeah. So before we even get to the speech, I mean, there was preambles that led up to it. So it started with back in December, the Senate Armed Services Committee, Senator Wicker, laid out the Forged Act that looked at, radically, streamlining Title X authorities and some of the cumbersome bureaucracy that was in statute. And then in the spring, the president issued a slew of executive orders at the first time to really get more personally involved from the White House level on defense acquisition reform. And there were big efforts on reform defense acquisition, embrace commercial, look at foreign military sales, and kind of streamline federal procurement. So those all came and had huge implications that then set the stage for the department moving out on a bold strategy for acquisition reform that was then codified in the secretary's speech. So I think just starting with Secretary Hegseth giving a big speech in front of all the defense executives, traditional and non, as well as all the program executive officers and other acquisition executives in the department, was hugely powerful in really emphasizing this is a radical new, departure in how we're going to do business. In the past, past reform efforts, hey, there was some big memo, there may have been an article or an op-ed, and, the department reacted to that. Just by having the speech that I think was about 90 minutes long that went through a whole array of reform efforts, I think really helped set the stage for these changes, and the department's moving out on a fast pace on a wide variety of these reforms.
Can we get a little bit of a aesthetic comparison? The first speech we talked to was this big general patent energy, and this one, I don't know, it was kind of different.
Yeah, I mean, getting into the details of defense, it's not exactly an easy way to capture an audience if you're going to start talking about program executive officers and service acquisition executives. I mean, it's almost like a speech Roger Wicker would have given. And his team to Pete's point, have been genuinely focused on this from, I hate this concept in this term, but like a wonk's perspective, someone that's trying to actually unwind a complicated problem. So it is in spirit closer to that. And we're going to do our best for the rest of our conversation today to electrify an audience about the variance among PMs and all these various stakeholders who have their hands on development projects. But I think it was Matt earlier in our conversation illustrated the point of, American attack submarines are taking, like, the United States Navy and the Defense Industrial Base is able to put like 1.3 of them to sea a year, which is shambolic. Using that existing time frame and some of the reforms that the Pentagon announced this week, I'm curious, like, when does the United States get to 3 a week? assuming that you're not putting in new shipyards, you're not recruiting more aggressively, you're not just throwing money at it. But do these reforms articulately enable the Department of the Navy to just press the yes button more rapidly so you can put more attack boats into the sea?
Yeah, so when I listened to the speech, like the biggest thing that came away in the difference in energy is one, it was 90 minutes, which is a very long time to talk about acquisitions. Things that I know really, really well, I can't speak about for 90 minutes extemporaneously without people looking at me and going, please be quiet. I think some of the things are very good if they're implemented very, very well. And I think that's what he was trying to drive at. And the reason the energy was so much different is because there had to be a lot of nuance in some of the things he was saying. Like when he was describing the power dynamics, they're going to shift in acquisitions offices. If you say the wrong thing at that point, you're going to over empower or under empower someone, or they're going to feel like they're hamstrung because they could just point to the recording and be like, that's not what he said. He said this. Um, Normally, traditionally, secretaries of defense like Gates and Carter would have preferred to do that with a much smaller soundbite. Something like, Gates saying something along the lines of like, we sure are spending a whole lot of money on B2s. Sure would be nice if we could produce stuff that costs less than $2 billion a pop. But that would be like the only thing he'll say about it.
No,
And then his
he'd be like
policy.
picking up his laundry at the Pentagon and be like, you know what? I hate the F-22. Somebody should solve that.
Exactly.
And then he'd wander away.
Yeah, exactly. And then like his policy minions would do it. And I think that is where I saw probably a significant change is you're seeing a less robust staff. And we've kind of talked about this, like the NSC doesn't seem as robust as it has in the past. The policy, and probably in some ways because Secretary Hegseth seems to be kind of anathema to bureaucracy to begin with. He's just going to say it. And that's going to be the thing, which is very much like how the president acts. He just goes out and says it. And then like whatever's going to happen, like that'll get sorted out. But I'm going to say what I want to be the policy. Um, like I said, it becomes an interesting way to conduct business because the downside is it leaves a lot up to interpretations when some of the memos that we're referencing just for like that led into this 90-minute speech are a page and a half long. Like they're very short memos. And then like they have now engendered a very, very long, fulsome look at the acquisitions. And there are definitely issues. When we were pushing back initially, it's just more defining the problem. Like who are the villains in the acquisitions process?
We've already defined it.
Yeah, if I can say one thing.
It's those greedy stockholders who force companies to think about earnings, and every bag holder with a 401k who wants RTX to do a buyback, not reinvest in the DIB.
So I do think there are a couple of things to your question, Eric, about is there something there for the big systems? I think overall the tone of the reforms, and Pete can correct me here if he disagrees, but the tone of the reforms was a lot more around getting faster updates, getting more hedge type systems, lower cost systems, getting prototypes fielded faster. I think the focus is a little bit less on making the F-35, easier to produce or making solving the Columbia class problem. You think those things, generally they recognize those are more entrenched kind of issues that have to be resolved. But I don't think there was nothing there. I think there were things that kind of get after that, which is, around faster requalification. So, when you change out a part on many of these big weapon systems, you have to like requalify the entire system and go through this huge process. It could take a year. Testing can drag on forever. So, there's like zero risk in that process. And I think where the department is leaning with some of these reforms is like, okay, well, let's find a smarter way to qualify that component and be able to get that in the system quick. And this gets kind of to the updates piece, without having to requalify the whole thing. But that's also going to help Columbia class too, as they're going through their process and they have to change something in the design or there's like a production issue. And then the other piece of it, I would say, is things like supply chain stuff, right? I think the Columbia class is one example, but F-35s has plenty of its own issues, and B2, I'm sure, has it, and we just haven't heard about it. But supply chain issues are, all over the place because all these exquisite components sometimes come from one or two sources, and they don't produce a lot. And so I think one of the things that you see throughout this whole memo is like we have to understand that supply chain base better because we do not have good visibility. We don't really have a way to mitigate the impacts. And I think now there are some better tools that they can actually bring to bear. So I think there could be some things that can help things like Columbia class. Yeah.
Yeah, and having, Hegseth give this speech, yeah, it went into a lot of wonky details. Now, as a longtime acquisition nerd, yeah, I ate all that stuff up because that's what Matt and I do on a daily basis. But to really, it hits some of the key themes of industry. We need you to think differently. This is going to be a growth opportunity. He said multiple times, as a capitalist, we want you to be successful and have good stock growth and revenue streams. But we've got to pivot the model. We want to see more private capital invested. In the shipyards, in scaling munition productions, in some of the other key areas and, the department and, the government as a whole will also put some capital up, but it's not, we're just going to do the same old model of throw another $1 billion and say, please, please, please deliver more or faster and hope for the best results. So there is a pivot, for the new entrants that are going to operate at a faster pace and compete and deliver some capabilities. There's going to be new opportunity space. The biggest thing we've seen is a stark reduction in the number of companies, since the Last Supper back in the 90s. Thousands of companies have left, and that trend has continued over the last 5 years. So we need more companies competing for each of the major contracts as we get into portfolios and we say, hey, we need a suite of capabilities. Often call it the barbell strategy of a few, low quantity exquisite systems, and then high quantities of lower unit cost systems, often attritable. We need that mix of vendors. We need all the companies, traditional and non, all the mid-tier suppliers in the mix, contributing solutions. And if for each major capability area, we have more competition that's going to drive down cost, increase innovation, and keep everybody on their toes. But if you win the big contract for 10 to 15 years and all the competitors left, then you're going to have more monopolistic power and bad things happen. So it's really driving that change. And then internally to the acquisition workforce, it's, hey, who's the enemy? Well, it's the bureaucrats. It's that, evil bureaucracy, the frozen middle that we always demonize that says, yeah, but you've got to do the 50-point checklist before you could, move on to the next phase. And you've got to coordinate with 40 different offices with your documentation and triplicate. That has changed. That it's now more delegating decision authorities to portfolio executives, giving more authorities across requirements, acquisition, and budget to move out on some key areas. But the key is how are you getting capability out the door and what timeline? When we look at deterring China and we go, yeah, we got these great systems in the pipeline, but they're not coming until the 2030s. Well, that may be too late. So what can you get to me in the next 3 to 5 years to deliver to Admiral Paparo and others? So I think that's some of the powerful messaging that's come out from the speech and some of the key initiatives.
I think your reference to the Last Supper is really good. I wonder when we shift and we start looking at the defense industrial base, like how do you guys define that? Is that the primes plus the new entrants, or is that the whole of U.S. manufacturing, or some subset of that?
Yeah, it has to be, it's everything. And I would say it's also, we don't really, I mean, we do need to better define the industrial base, defense industrial base, because it also involves a lot of the commercial sectors too that are feeding into that. But I think to Pete's point about the production is we really have defense really has sort of isolated itself, and we have very limited shipyards, very limited production capacity, and so we do need help to build that. And I think now like the redefinition of the defense industrial base is all those companies, commercial and these new defense, non-traditional defense contractors coming in and being like, yeah, I'm willing to invest in, an infrastructure to support this. And, sometimes it might be a dual use thing where they produce some stuff for commercial sector, and then, there's capacity for defense problems as well. And I think you're going to see that over the next 5 years, you're going to see a lot more infrastructure actually come from the private capital side to build up the industrial base. and that will will benefit from that by by virtue of being able to actually get to the scale that Paycom needs.
Yeah. Yeah. So to me, that's one of the issues that I felt like hasn't been focused on quite as much is so you've got this small, like I think 93% of manufacturing in the United States, right, is small businesses, like, less than 100 people, over it's like 85% or less than 20 people or something like that. Where I see one of the issues is like, I think we're talking tier one, right? Like that's what we've been talking about. We've been talking about tier one acquisitions. Like, where does the end product come from? But my question becomes, when we look at these defense acquisitions, how much have we changed those tier two suppliers, the wiring harness people or the people that are machining specific parts to go in, and have we made that easier? Because saying we've made it, easier for new entrants, that's good, as long as that new entrants expands the base. But if we're saying it's new entrants that have, $1 billion VC backing, that's still a very small pool, right?
I can give one example from just my time at Anduril, which is, we often ran up against, that exact supply chain that you said, where there's literally one person who supplies to all the defense contractors, and yeah, it's a lower tier thing. It's a component.
Yeah.
They, all the radios or all the PNT devices or all the, ComSec, like all that comes from that one thing, and it's a real kind of choke point. And so a lot of what I've seen with the non-traditionals is that they're unwilling to play in that space because they immediately see that they can't scale with that. And so I will say Andrew, and I think some of this they've talked about publicly, they will go out and sometimes they'll invent their own component and start building up their manufacturing. Sometimes they will go work with another company that can do it better and cheaper and more scalable. So I think that is one area that the addition to the defense industrial base of all these non-traditionals and the private capital piece is actually helping that more middle supply chain, and it's not just the top, like you were saying there.
Yeah, so I mean, the supply chain risk is a huge problem that the department's really focused on, and some of the reforms go into we want more increased visibility and brighter strategies, looking across, from a portfolio and a broader department strategy of where's the vulnerabilities, whether it's few or single suppliers or some foreign investments and other adversary capital concerns, to really get at, strengthening the foundation of our supply chain. So it starts with understanding where the vulnerabilities are. Some of the defense companies, with, 5, 6, 7 tiers down, don't have that visibility. So just gaining that visibility. And then from a department perspective, to know, hey, if I want to, acquire many more munitions, well, it all hinges on this one linchpin company, 3 tiers down, that we need to have that understanding and then there's a variety of strategies and capital that could be put towards the problem. And the department's really put a big effort on that in the last year.
Matt, if you don't want to take the bait, I can cut this part. But so Chris Brose was on China Talk a few weeks ago, and
Yeah.
he said something to the effect of, all this defense acquisition reform stuff, honestly, they have all the authorities they need to make big stuff happen. It's just, the will to swing for the fences. What are your thoughts or reflections on that quote?
No, I love it. Thank you. I'll take the bait. No, I totally agree. And I think you'll see in our analysis of the memo and this broader speech and the broader reforms is that yeah, there's nothing here that's entirely new. I will say there's some different twists that make it that could actually do some interesting things that maybe haven't been done before. Things like advanced market commitments and different things with supply chain to really incentivize private capital and things like that are a little bit novel. But most of these things have been pursued to some extent. I think what we're really seeing is like it's about the energy behind it. So I totally agree with Chris. We really don't need too many new authorities. There are some things like you can get rid of CAS, like would be helpful. There's this requalification. There are some things that are problematic that still need addressed. But overall, the authorities, the program office can do all the things it needs to do to be fast, iterative, and be successful. And we've seen that, right, with some of the programs that actually have been successful. So yeah, fundamentally that's true. But I think the energy behind this is the difference. There needs to be some top cover for a lot of the workforce to do some of these novel things, because the system, to Pete's point about the villain being the bureaucrat, the system is still programmed and trained and culturized to basically do what they did 10 years ago. And it's still a path to really build that muscle, that muscle memory of this new paradigm across the entire enterprise. So I'd say that's the part where this is really, really helpful.
Speaking of culture, so we have Pete who's clean shaven. Matt's camera is off. Do we need no beards in the defense acquisition community? What are our thoughts on the aesthetics?
Matt's the beardo of the team here, but he's still cool.
I was going to say this. Go ahead, Pete.
I mean, yeah. So it's not about the clean shaven, but it's definitely the culture of, are we supporting the warfighter? It's not about just protecting your legacy interest, but really on how do we get that capability out the door and iterate, working with a wide variety of companies and really changing the culture. And to Matt's earlier point, it's all about execution. You can write the most perfect memo, the most perfect strategy, the most perfect NDAA that says, go do this. It all comes down to the people going to execute it. From the leadership up top to say, hey, go forth and take that hill, and we'll accept more risk and more failure along the way, to, at the services levels that they're more on the front lines of adopting this, and then the new portfolio acquisition executives, picking the right people to really lead the charge, working with a wide variety of bureaucrats across the Pentagon, closer ties to the operational community, and then closer ties to industry, to then say, we're doing things different. And then it trickles down to everyone in the acquisition workforce moving out on many of these reform efforts. So it's not about, some, team in the Pentagon, executing some new memo, but it's more those on the front lines, embodying this in their day-to-day jobs.
If I can add something about culture, about day-to-day jobs, if there was anything I could do inside the Pentagon to make it more responsive to industry, to the needs of the services, of the combatant commands, it's something I learned as a first-year associate at a law firm. When I started my legal career, I had a special counsel at a law firm, which is what I am now, which is not quite partner, but not an associate anymore. Sit me down, not on my first day, but on like my third day, and looked me straight in the eye. And she was a West Point graduate. She's partner now. She is a hitter, and just ruthlessly said, "We are not paying you for your legal expertise. You have none. We are paying you for your availability. You are there to answer the phone, to answer the email, to keep us on tabs, and don't you ever forget it." And that stuck with me. And it led me over the course of my legal career to now to be like a zero inbox person. If you reach out to me, you're getting an answer. If you have an ask for me, I'm going to provide a response. And I compare that culture to what I witnessed inside the Pentagon in acquisitions, in lending, in innovation land, where inboxes were like overflowing with material and people would check on them every 6 weeks. There was no spirit of urgency. People liked to talk about the Davidson window, but they didn't like to make sure that all the requests for assistance that were buried in their inbox were answered. So the Secretary of Defense can get on stage and talk about all the fat generals and fat admirals, and maybe there's some truth to that. But I hope the commentary from last week is also a cultural warning to acquisitions that says you are no longer the princes and princelings, barons and baronets of your micro empires. Get out there and service the customer. Make sure that the people who are trying to help the Pentagon have someone who's picked up the phone and responded to the note. Make sure this broader defense industrial base are aware that there are people inside the building who care, and that is not business as usual. And for all the talk about run government like a business, this is one place where government desperately needs to be run like a business. And it's just as simple as being responsive and taking your job seriously enough to stay a little late and clear out your inbox and make sure that everyone who wants to be part of it knows that they're part of it.
I love that so much. I've started a blog basically trying to hit at the point of like how does an acquisition professional, and we could definitely expand what you just said to broader than acquisition, but for the acquisition professional, too much of their day, I will say, is spent doing taskers and generally low value work. And it's kind of been amazing to me, and just having been on the industry side for only a year and a half. So, that was it was a pretty robust learning experience to just be like one of these people that reaches out and has to reach out to all these different offices and try to get help and try to get an answer or support. It is amazing how often you don't hear back, or you get stymied, or it's just it's like, yeah, we don't have the time for this. And I really, one of the things I want to hit in our piece is like 50% of your day should be talking to industry. Like, industry is the one that delivers, the products. Like 10% of your day should be taskers. And you do have to do some of the internal work in the building to build support, keep advocacy, and do all that. So there is some of that, but most of your time should be spent with industry, understanding the market, going out there, figuring out what what are the right business deals, like what does it take to make things happen, responding to, inquiries, providing support, building up, what does it take to kind of incentivize companies that maybe are debating working for defense, being out there and helping guide them and mentor them. Like, acquisition professionals should be way more focused on that. But sadly, I think your point is valid. They have they have too many taskers, their inbox is overflowing, and they prioritize that because that's what their boss is concerned about, and they don't necessarily do all the other things that
So,
yeah.
staying on this for a little longer, Matt, what is a tasker? What are the dumb things that end up happening to fill up people's day?
It's
Ooh.
kind of funny because I always felt bad because I have worked in headquarters, and I sadly have been a person that had to task the acquisition workforce. And sometimes it's one of those things where, because we don't have the best data systems in DoD, it's actually hard to answer a question that a political appointee or someone senior would ask. Like, they're about to go into a meeting and they're like, "Hey, how many torpedoes do we have? And what is the replenishment rate, or what's the expenditure rate?" And you're like, great question. So, invariably what that turns into is there's not a data system you can go to find that. So it's a tasker. It goes out to the field. Hey guys, what's the replenishment rate? What's this? And then that gets flowed down to like 5 levels to a guy, some engineer who actually like is tracking this somewhere. And he has to put together a spreadsheet, fill out a form or whatever, send it back up. It gets reviewed. The admiral that is above him is like, no, that doesn't look right. Go back and check this. And then, it just takes a lot of people's time to answer what is sometimes a seemingly simple question, can become a real like tasking nightmare. So, and those are constant, right? Because there's so many meetings happening in the Pentagon. There's so many meetings at the Hill. The White House is asking things. And so invariably the acquisition workforce gets hit with all of those.
Yeah, the moment a senior leader instructs someone to build a PowerPoint for them, it is a tasker. You're setting their time on fire. You're hurting American national security when you expect information to be spoon-fed to you in a slide deck. Read the memo or quit your job.
Yeah,
Excuse
and
me.
it goes to balancing acquisition risk versus operational risk. And I recall a conference about a decade ago, and the whole day operational commanders were, "You guys need to go faster. You guys in acquisition, we need things faster, faster, faster." And then at the end of the day, the acquisition executive got on stage and said, "If you want it done right, take your time. Do that upfront analysis properly, dot your I's, cross your T's, and throughout the acquisition lifecycle. And let's test the heck out of it. It's got to be perfect so that we deliver something to the warfighter so it lasts 30 to 50 years." And that was the most appalling thing I heard. That it, just didn't, that executive just didn't fully appreciate it. And 25 plus years in acquisition, you're taught early on to say, burn down that acquisition risk, make sure things are going to work properly, and be good stewards of the taxpayer money. Meanwhile, the operational command is dealing with 30-year-old legacy system. Readiness levels are in the toilet, often below 50%, anything ready to go to fight tonight. And, this is just old capabilities that don't necessarily work well together. So the more every month we take doing better acquisition paperwork means we're just shifting that risk to the operational command. So I think part of a key theme of this reform now is speed. Get that capability out, even if it's a 60, 80, 85% solution. Get it out to Indo-PACOM or wherever now, and then iterate is going to be much more effective than a perfect solution in the 2030s.
You're never going to get me to say that acquisitions or that taskers are a good thing. As a guy who is on the ground, generally the way those acquisitions things actually go is they go down to that engineer, and then he doesn't know the answer, and then they go down to ground units, and then they get asked to answer it, and then that has to trickle back up. So the impact is twofold. I remember being asked how many 120s we had in Syria as we were actively shooting them, and just being like, "What?" Like, no, I'm not answering that question. We have stuff to do. But anyway,
Yeah,
That's a great point.
and I recognize that it's unfashionable to speak ill of civil servants, especially given the Doge disaster and rifts and a general semblance of disrespect towards the idea of public service as a whole. That has to be coupled with an acknowledgement that if you expect civil servants in the acquisitions field to operate at the speed of contemporary industry, uh, different training and different expectations are going to have to be there. I witnessed GS-15s who are so technologically inept, they had their first line supervisors filling out their time card. Like, I know that's anecdotal and it's just one person who should not be emulated, but the fact that that person was in a supervisory role and they were not corrected nor shifted elsewhere nor demoted, like there's a widespread acceptance of incompetence, and there's also a widespread culture where attending meetings is mistaken for work. That if you are in the building from 8 until 4, you're working. And I hate falling back on my personal experience because I recognize that it can't be, universally applied, but there is something to entry-level legal work or investment banking where you are clocked on the hour and you become accustomed to moving at the speed of a customer. And the civil service can probably learn quite a bit from the private sector on how to actually do delivery. Because to Matt's, I think, extraordinarily important point, these acquisitions professionals should be less focused on like the office monthly birthday party than they already are. And they should be building cultures of reciprocal information flow between industry and between government in a meaningful way. And you just can't do that if you don't think your job is to open up your Outlook account in the morning and clear it out. And I just don't think that culture exists right now.
Yeah, and
Matt.
we have
Oh,
we
sorry.
have huge
Go
love
ahead, Pete.
for the civil servants and have worked with many innovative acquisition professionals over the years. And the sad thing is we've seen many of the good ones leave over the last few years because they were frustrated with the bureaucracy. That there was that GS-15, not to pick on anyone in particular, that just didn't that had the closed mindset. They weren't going to
Yeah, I
change.
think that's
They
fair.
just weren't qualified for the role they were in. And that's just crushing for the organization that they're leaving. And that, we're all, good patriots trying to, help the department. And, after biting our heads against the wall for too many times, we say enough, and I'm going to go, elsewhere to pursue this mission. But, particularly this year, contracting officers in particular, the department's lost thousands. Contracting officers were always strained in years past. There was always more work to do than contracting officers to do it. And, we always, we were lucky enough to, be tied to some exceptional contracting officers that focused on figuring out how to get to yes and instead of telling you 10 reasons why you can't do it. But now that we pivot towards more commercial solutions openings and other transaction authorities, that is a more rapid, iterative, but more clean sheet approach. That you're not burdened by the full FAR and the full weight, where you could just check all the FAR clauses and feel safe. You need those years of experience in contracting to then go, all right, if a clean sheet, what's the agreement that we need with the industry that we both have the proper protections, it's rapid, it's flexible, and you need those years of experience. that you can't just give some first year, contracting professional, but we've lost a lot of them. So there is some housekeeping, house cleaning. We got rid of some that needed to go. We lost some good people, and as we rebuild and we pivot to a more dynamic, agile, rapid environment, it's getting the good people in each of these professions with the right mindset.
Everything you said is essential. How are we going to do it as a country? How do you recruit the most energized undergraduates or the most accomplished MBA finalists, like in their last year? How do you get them to go pursue a universal warrant rather than go to McKinsey? Because what they know is they are going into kind of a faceless bureaucracy that there are few civil service protections anymore. There are long periods of shutdown uncertainty. You could be riffed if you're probationary and Elon Musk decides that you're subhuman. Like, how do you build a workforce that is enduring, that can cultivate the kind of skills that are necessary to facilitate interaction by and between the federal government and industry?
For years, the environment was always you're just a small cog in the big bureaucratic machine. So, I mean, I was a second lieutenant fresh out of college, coming into the acquisition environment, and you're doing your lower level taskers, and in 10 years you can work your way up to do something meaningful. But if this culture change takes root to say, no, we're focused on we're going to get some meaningful prototype or capability out to an operational environment in 2 years, before you rotate to your next assignment, that's going to be powerful. That's going to recruit and incentivize the right people to come join and be a part of this mission. But if it's it's the same old bureaucracy, you've got your inbox of 50 taskers and you got to fill out your reports in triplicate, then, the wrong people are going to stick around. So I think that's part of it. And then as far as recruiting the next generation, Matt, I think you could talk to some of the programs you've been working on.
Yeah, before I came to Andrew, actually, and I think this is an encouraging thing, Eric, is there was a program stood up called the Defense Civilian Training Corps, essentially ROTC for civilian workers. And we basically started with like 5 universities, pretty prominent ones, Virginia Tech and um, Purdue, among them. And we put out applications to the student populations of those universities, and we got overwhelming interest to join. We had to go through a pretty rigorous selection process, and we were only able to take a small percentage of them. But there is interest in working in government problems, and from the work from the generation coming up. And I think more encouragingly too, what I've seen just in my time at Andrew and talking to other non-traditional companies is we're also seeing the people that used to be focused on wanting to go to Silicon Valley and work for Facebook and try to work on like making the social media platform a little bit better and working on a new feature. A lot of them have sort of pivoted, and they seem less interested in doing that. Yes, there's still a whole fleet of people doing that, but there's an increasingly people who want to work on really hard problems, and defense is really great at doing hard problems, and there's a little bit more, I think, maybe intrinsic reward of solving a national security thing than maybe making Facebook a little bit better at getting ad revenue. So I think that's really encouraging. But I do think the department, and one of the reforms that is in the memo, is actually getting more industry into defense acquisition. We right now do not have a good entry point for them. It's kind of hard because all the qualifications and stuff is all about basically already being in the system. So we need to make that easier to get that revolving door. Some people will say bad things about the revolving door. I think it's actually a really good thing. We need to let it spin a lot quicker, and I think that would help.
Yeah, I want to triple down on that last point. I think cultural reticence about having experience in industry or banking or insurance or finance or law, it needs to go away. That the ability to move seamlessly between the Pentagon and industry, ethics concerns aside, uh, we've got to bracket that and ensure that people aren't self-dealing. But I do think that there is real value in like understanding how Bank of America functions at like a journeyman level, and then going in and being a GS-14 like that. I think could be transformational.
I did want to come back. It's something you guys said earlier. and I think we kind of talked about it a little bit tangentially just now, but so we talk about software and software being like one of the big things that you guys see as being able to come on. Is there a fear when you look at like Angel's SDK or Palantir or pick the software provider that we get into a vendor lock scenario that is not unlike the prime lock that we have to some degree with the major weapon systems?
I think that is the perception, is that it's the same. And the difference, I would say, is yes, the primes built, I will say, it's not their fault. They built to the specs they were given. And so they built a system that was inherently now, could they have done a little better in some cases? Sure. But they built a system that was, optimized for performance for the particular system that they were building to. And so when you build a system optimized for performance, you generally don't focus on openness and all those other attributes that are now fundamental for getting those updates in faster. Where I think the non-traditional companies that are bringing different data platforms, tools to the table, and while they are licensed proprietary products, they are built with inherently open characteristics, and that's not because they're benevolent or they have some huge they're being incentivized to do that per se. It's that just that's how the commercial sector is. Like some of the software people that I've worked with, like they don't even know how to build something that's not open, because you have to do that to be able to get APIs and to inject new stuff. Like the commercial sector demands that, and so they're bringing that mindset. So while I think the department does need to be wary of, and make sure that there's not something that is a proprietary blocker that's going to keep things, from happening. I'm not saying they should never keep an eye on that, but inherently these new tools are a lot more open just by their design, nature of their design, and I think they will contribute greater to interoperability and some of the things that that need to be done ahead for like JADC2 and things like that.
Yeah, I guess I wonder, and the nexus of this question, probably less for Andrew because they're still in the adoption phase, really, in a lot of ways with their system, but or with Lattice, I should say, but more with like Palantir. Like as Palantir ingests data, they change that data, code it to be able to be useful in Palantir's system. The inverse being that means that it's not necessarily then the same data that was put in. You know what I mean? Like the KM that was putting it in is now fundamentally changed and is owned by Palantir. Does the same thing not happen? Like Lockheed builds a system that goes on to Lattice. Does that not then just make Lattice still like a single point of failure, for lack of a better term?
I will just say I won't critique any particular platform, but I'll just say that the government should demand that interfaces are open and provided, and that any data generated from the platform for them is provided and accessible. And I think if you do that, then you'll be okay. Yeah.
When do you see results? If you paid attention to LinkedIn in the immediate 90 minutes after Pete Hegseth's speech, it was a moment of unparalleled glory. It was like a Monty Python animation of God coming down and handing chalices out to the poor commoners. I think a lot of that was overstated. But when will skeptics like me be proven wrong? How do we know if acquisitions reform is improving the state of affairs? Or when can we say that this was rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic? Give us some measurable indicators.
Yeah. So for me, the number one measure is always, what capabilities the acquisition system, backed by the industrial base, what are we delivering to the operational commands? So that's always going to be the ultimate one. And it's not just, number of ships, number of munitions and the like, but it's the mission effects. Doing a rapid iteration of some capabilities, integrating solutions that may have not worked together for a more seamless kill chain. That's always going to be, the ultimate measure. And are we getting many new capabilities, all the great and wonderful new drones and other capabilities that are emerging that we talk about week to week? Is that capability getting out the door to an operational environment? The big speech and memos have been a long time coming. Within the services, they've seen, the sausage being made and already starting to announce their portfolio acquisition executives. The Army just released some information yesterday, and more information should be coming soon. But again, that's not just rearranging boxes on an org chart, but it's really, are we pivoting? Are we able to flexibly move funding and shift requirements to get a partial solution out the door faster? Are we seeing a significant increase in private and public capital going towards key parts of the industrial base so that we can shore up manufacturing, munitions, shipbuilding, and many other key vulnerable areas, including the supply chain? And then, so there's going to need to be some early wins, some early success stories that aren't just policy wonk stuff that I get excited about, but real meaningful capabilities of, hey, we had this operational challenge, we pulled together a few companies, integrated a solution, and got it out the door in a pretty rapid turnaround. And the more we can have those success stories out, the better.
Yeah, it's a nice place to close. Thanks so much, guys, for being a part of Second Breakfast.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah,
Enjoyed
thanks
the
very much.
Yeah,
discussion.
thanks for coming on.
Yeah.
It was great.
0600, phone blowing up red. Prudy one tasker, better staff it or you're dead. 5 days suspense, but they want it today. PowerPoint Ranger, you don't get a say. Zippernet screaming in box full of dread. Another fucking tasker dropped right on my head. Tasker bomb dropped on my desk. Tasker bomb, no time to rest. Another all-nighter in the E-ring grind. Losing mine. J3 wants slides, J5 wants a brief. OSD says the safe dev needs relief. Lawyers got red lines, controller says no. The shared drive is broken, where the fuck does this go? 12 tabs in the X, so make it 13 just in case. Gotta brief the deputy before he shows his face. Tasker bomb dropped on my desk. Tasker bomb, no time to rest. Another all-nighter in the E-ring grind. Losing mine. For my last email, this was due yesterday. Unfuck the timeline, square it with J8, and ghostwrite the talking points for the goes off record on record. Slide 15, make the red more stretching. Closer play, people, don't make me tell you twice. My kid's got a game that I'm gonna miss. A wife stopped asking why I'm late, she knows it's this. GTO evolution, Taiwan scenario, COA that the third day killed, but the general wants to show. Green coffee mug, green notebook, green as a marine, but these goddamn taskers are draining me clean. Tasker bomb dropped on my desk. Tasker bomb, no time to rest. Another all-nighter in the E-ring grind. Losing mine. Tasker bomb dropped on my desk. Tasker bomb, no time to rest. Another all-nighter in the E-ring grind. Losing mine. Staff it, brief it, sign it, set it up. I'm doing this for grunts in the dirt, in the mud, for the squid on the boat and the pilot above. But the ops tempo's endless, the inbox never clears. Just a TSI badge and a debt paid in years. So send me your Robert Fies, your cut out pain. I'll staff them in the darkness, in the sleet and